Welcome to the Psycho Studios podcast. We are coming to you recorded live from the desert, Phoenix, Arizona. I'm Mr. W, and my co-host as usual is Mr. Z. We are a father and son team that brings smarts and creativity to this podcast and our newsletter. We are a TV film production company. Our focus and passion is on writing smart and original ideas. We are horror nuts. We use this platform to connect with our psychos. We also explore the art side of horror with related images and art pieces. Topics we're going to explore: film and music. We're keeping it short and sweet. And let's leave the politics at the door. We'll be fun, thought-provoking, and value-add. We provide our listeners a space where news and notes are real. We are honest and care about our fellow humans. Why not stop scrolling for about an hour? Take a deep breath as we share gratitude and appreciation for the little things. Regarding the Psycho Studios podcast as well as our newsletter, The Sprinkler, each episode of our podcast will be fun and engaging, we promise. Every chapter of our newsletter will be well written and engaging. The Sprinkler will contain practical life skills to help our listeners with efficiency and money savings. Who can't use that now? We drop our podcast and the newsletter on the first of each month. And you can check us out on our website, psycho-studio.com. Again, that's psycho-studio.com. We're going to kick this off with a quick quote. This is about as short as it gets. The quote is, "I love making movies." And that is brought to us by John Carpenter, one of our favorite directors. And this month's film and album. We're going to kick this off with The Thing from 1982. That is a John Carpenter film. And Rats Out of the Cellar album from 1984. Mr. Z, what do you got?
So, the movie The Thing, all right? The Thing is a science fiction horror movie directed by John Carpenter, released in 1982, which is actually a remake from the 1951 film The Thing from Another World, which itself was based on a 1938 novella, Who Goes There, by John W. Campbell, Jr. The story is set in Antarctica and following a group of American researchers who encounter a shape-shifting alien organism that can imitate any living organism that it comes in contact. As the paranoia and distrust grip the isolated research station, the crew must figure out who among them is human and who is an alien imposter, while also dealing with the creature's attempt to assimilate them all. The film is known for its intense atmosphere, groundbreaking special effects by
Rob Bottin,
and a haunting score composed by
Enrico Morricone.
Carpenter masterfully builds tension throughout the movie, creating a sense of claustrophobia and paranoia among all the characters and audience alike. Starring Kurt Russell as the protagonist, R.J. McReady.
Macready.
Or Macready.
Well, no, if you read it, I'm sure that was intentional, right? It would be McCready, and they say McCready.
Yes.
But it's written out Macready.
Correct. And The Thing has become a cult classic in the horror genre. And it's really is celebrated for its practical effects and its physicology horror.
Psychology, yep.
Today I can't speak, sorry about that.
We'll get through it.
It's often praised for its portrayal of fear and paranoia in its isolating setting. And the ending, for sure, is a hot topic, which leaves fate up to the surviving characters, and it's open to interpretation.
That it is, with actually 3 ending shots, so definitely interesting.
For sure. So that was just a quick, hopefully somewhat coherent summarization of the film that we'll be reviewing.
Yep, shake it off. And just to go with that synopsis, as Mr. Z said, that it's hard to believe, 1982. That makes it sound like it's a Model T almost for some of you out there. Came in at 109 minutes, which was a little bit long for that type of genre at that time. So definitely warranted. What was it rated?
Wasn't it rated R?
It was that.
Yes.
That's an R for sure. It was released in the summer of '82, June to be exact. And the budget, do you remember what it was?
It was like 50 million.
$15 million budget, and that's estimated. And
Right.
that's about 48 million in today's dollars. So
Yeah.
you're right there, right?
I was thinking of today's
No,
dollars.
I get it. And the box office at that time, do you want to guess what that was again?
That was, again, probably another 50
No,
million.
it wasn't. Stop it.
Yeah.
It was so the box office was around 19 plus $1 million,
Yeah.
and that is recent, as a matter of fact. So when they re-released it a few different times over the last handful of years, it bumped that gross amount to almost 20 million worldwide.
I happen to be a few of those patrons.
Yep, same here, same here. I was fortunate enough, or unfortunate, because now that means I'm old, but I did see it when it was first released in the theater with a very good friend and her mom. So that was interesting to say the least.
So usually how we do these things, we usually score it on a 0 to 10 scale. And I would like to give my faithful score a 9.5.
Wow.
So I think overall, special effects, scenery, the matte paintings that, for its time were phenomenal. And just the acting, and you just could list everything. That's the reason why it's such a high score. It's just everything's firing at full cylinders. And I think it's honestly John Carpenter's only good movie.
Wow. That's going to have to be a conversation for another time. Do you want me to give my score then?
Yes, I think so.
Well, we can match toe to toe on this because I would give it a 9.5 as well. I think something that resonates with me, which you gave in your synopsis, and that is it's that feeling of paranoia and isolation. It's just, I don't know if it's done better in any movie than that movie. It's just, it's so perfect. And obviously, it fits the story and the dialogue. And like you said, the acting, top to bottom, is great. It's all practical effects. And it's just, it comes together in such a great ensemble cast, right? Where the entire cast is all men, with the exception of at the very beginning when McGreedy, Kurt Russell's character, is playing electronic chess. The voice, if you want to call it that, is female, and that happens to be Adrienne Barbeau, who was married to John Carpenter at the time. So, yeah, 9.5, knocked it out. I loved it the moment I walked out of the theater, but it did take some people to let it age like a fine wine. What else you got?
Well, it started out very strong. I mean, the movie, I feel like you don't even get a moment, and you don't even realize that at first, that like you just realize that the movie's going to constantly keep going, and there's like no breaks. It doesn't, it you have to keep questioning the entire time what is going to be going on. And I think it does that very well. And I just, after that statement, I just want to follow it up with, I think the camera in itself is another character. What it shows and doesn't show, and the sway and movement throughout the entire film, and like it's almost a lot of it is like the point of view from another character.
Before that was even popular.
Right.
Well, yeah, I concur with that as well, right? We've got the acting, which you called out, right? Great cast, top to bottom. But then we've got the way the camera is used as almost another character, and then the way that Enrico, if I'm saying his name right, his score is another character in itself. It's just, and obviously John Carpenter does infuse some of his music as well, like he's done, I think, for most of his movies. But really, you've got a triple header there that just comes out at the end as an excellent movie. What else you got?
So you don't have anything?
Sure. So you had mentioned it. I think it's interesting when you see some of the interviews with John Carpenter over the years about his take on this movie, and also the really people at large, whether it's critics or fans or entities like Fangoria and that the different horror science fiction magazines. But it's so curious to me how it was really almost shot down in flames when it came out, to the point where John Carpenter was doubting his abilities because of the feedback from fans and the critics alike. And then we fast forward, whatever, 15 years, and then the movie becomes this iconic classic that some dub as one of the best or greatest horror science fiction movies ever made. And it reminds me of the way that the critics basically panned Psycho. They do that with so many movies, especially back in the day, as well as music, right? They said that the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds was terrible. And then over time, people come to the realization, wow, that is a great flick. What are your thoughts?
I just, even seeing movies today, I don't know how they don't, even back then, didn't see how that movie was just going to be a hit. But information spread so differently back then, and you can just click on the internet and see a review or a trailer for the movie. It's just, word of mouth or newspapers. It's just
Newspapers, yes.
so sad. It's incredible to me that I feel like with his direction, and I know sequels usually suck for the most part, but I think that movie almost screams a sequel. And the fact that we only got another reimagined
Mm.
remake, but it's like basically this movie, but retold like a prequel. It doesn't make any sense. So, and
It's
then
yeah.
there's only one other good thing that's come out of this, if you ask me. It's a PlayStation 2 video game, and it's The Thing. So it's based off of this movie, and it's a third-person squad shooter. So like a very old kind of way of how games used to be. It's actually great, and it like takes all the elements from the movie and kind of like elaborates on it. So it's pretty cool.
And only PlayStation game?
Yes, that's correct.
Wow. Yeah, it is. I love the way that you put that because I question that as well. I get the fact, like you said, about the transmission of information at how limited it was in 82 compared to today, but I still scratch my head on a movie's a movie, and I don't know how people cannot interpret it. Were they just like, I know we'd have to interview them, etc., but like, were they just trying to play it close to the vest? Do some people just like to complain or say something's bad just because that is going to get more headlines than if they said the movie was great? I know that there is some linkage there, and I think you brought this up to me, Mr. Z, about what other movie was playing a couple of weeks before that and during it. What movie was that?
I can't think of it off the top of my head.
So it was E.T.
That's right. Yes. Yep.
And
Another alien movie.
and it was, and when you see a couple of interviews with John Carpenter, I know he's a professional. When you see him interviewed and that, he still maintains that professionalism. You can see in his eyes, he's almost rolling them without rolling them about the fact that you have this. I, I, I don't know how to describe ET other than the fact that he was friendly, right? And he could touch things and it was a positive thing. And he was phoning home and that. And then 2 weeks later, you get the thing. And John Carpenter felt that that was a big part of why the movie wasn't successful like the studio was hoping for.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And it being rated R too, I mean, that unfortunately has closed the door. But as we can tell, rated R movies actually seem to be able these days, especially gross $1 billion.
Wow.
So it seems like the rating doesn't matter so much anymore because there's quite a few adults around.
There are, well, and I can speak from experience, and you mentioned this too about getting carded, etc., but I can tell you that that was very strict when I was coming up. If it was an R-rated movie, they absolutely didn't let kids in, at least at the theaters I went to. So that's a great call out about the R-rated feature and how that could have limited it. I still think that people just, they don't know what they've got until it's gone. I know how cliche that is, but when you reflect on this movie, that's why it takes me back. I know it's 82. We've said that so many times, but it's hard for me to imagine that that was 42 years ago. That movie looks like it could be released today.
Right, totally. That's why I wonder. I think I remember seeing some reviews saying how it was just gory and gross just to be, and that was John Carpenter's thing.
Yep.
But I think those, it's an alien movie, right? It's something supernatural. And we talk about those autopsy scenes. I mean, I don't think that those were gross and gory just for the sake of it. I mean, the acting on the characters, it's not just genuine. It's like when they first reveal for the first like morph creature they come across, they do an autopsy, and but when they undo the bag because it's melted away in that, it's stinky, and all the characters like
The looks on
I
their faces.
I swear like they must have actually pumped something in there that like they weren't expecting or something because it really, I feel like I can smell it right now just talking about it.
Well, and Rob Bottin, it's funny that you mentioned that because he talked about, as we know, we've said it, right? Practical effects. Everything in the movie is practical effects according to the people that made it. And Bottin said that they had to use they were just on the fly with a lot of this stuff, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
improvising. And he said a lot of the chemicals that they used, and he referenced specifically a scene with the head that detaches itself, but the chemicals they used, not only did they smell, but they were noxious.
Mm-hmm.
And he almost like laughed in a way that he was embarrassed that, he didn't mean to put anybody in harm's way, but that's what they were doing. I'm sure that added to it. But I love your call out about the autopsy scene, and the fact that the critics, I read quotes from critics about it was gross or gory just for the sake, and Carpenter had that reputation. But we could spend I could spend a half a day on this. But even if you look at the movie that put him on the map, Halloween, people will say that that is a bloody movie, and then if you go back and watch it, how much blood is in it?
I know, like
it,
like a
it
drop.
it's suggested, right?
Right,
I mean, the bloodiest scene might be at the beginning with the little
right.
brother and the sister.
Yeah, that's it.
So it's those assumptions, and that autopsy moves or drives the film. I love it when that one, is it Blair? He's like saying, "What we seem to have here is a full set of internal organs."
Well, and rewatching it, I didn't even think about it, but I mean, he really acts like a doctor and still not studying because when people just list things off casually, and this is if you're really into movies, he when he lists off, it's got a pair of, he says it's got a heart, but then you usually say a lung, but he says lungs, like he does emphasize that there's multiple things. I mean,
Kidneys.
he's like very detailed and he's like showing it and just but he doesn't seem very happy about it, but he's also at the same time like what the fuck is this really?
Yeah, yeah, I didn't research that part of it because there's only so much we're going to cover within the time frame of the podcast. But I would think that the organs that they're pulling out had to have been from like pigs or something,
i,
because they looked so real.
I believe that they did use certain things like that,
Yeah.
but they did use a lot of fake stuff,
Oh yeah. No.
just like that head detaching piece. They used bubble gum
I know he was saying all kinds of stuff.
and then they heat it up so when it was expanding it would
Yeah.
cut away like that.
Yeah, and that's when he was saying it became so noxious, the fumes, because of the bubble gum and the different chemicals in that. So yeah, crazy stuff. But I think ultimately it's interesting, the people that have the license to critique. It's so absurd even today. I've got something that I referenced in our newsletter about a movie that was recently released, and one of the people that came out and just lambasted that movie without going into those details. She's a famous producer that's produced movies for decades, and she is just ripping on that movie, ripping on the acting. And I get it. We've got a couple of reviews for like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2, right? If you're just being honest, there is a certain level of low review, but ultimately it's how the movie makes you feel and its opinion, and you can't be right or wrong, right?
Right.
It's what moves you.
Yeah, as long as you're saying I and this is how I feel, instead of saying a generalization or like a whole for an audience
Right,
speaking
this
for
is
them.
fact. Yeah.
And that's I think I just was watching something about Ricky Gervais and how he handles
Nice.
negativity or people saying he's racist or it makes them feel bad, but
Sure.
he says, at the end of the day, if they would just admit if it was just them that felt that way or they felt like it harmed them, that would make things a lot different.
Right, but they're talking for a collective group,
Right.
and it's a whole voice, and it still goes bleeds into social media, and can they get attention for that? That's a great point. And I've heard when I've heard comments from Ricky, he seems like a very smart individual, and that's a great call out. Other elements you want to hit right now, or you want me to go in on a few more?
So there's so many like subtle details in the thing. I think you could probably watch it 25 times and still pick up a new element that the I think not even the actors or the people sorry, the actors talking themselves, like the dialogue, like if you just watch what they're doing and like it's setting up the stage or it's like just as subtle as being handed ripped clothing, it you don't think about it, but they show up before that like well, he obviously does something with the clothes, but it's just they're not putting two to two together, so maybe you're not going to either. But outside looking in, hopefully you are, and that's how you can kind of gauge who maybe be the alien or not. But there's still twists in there because I feel like even the camera or John Carpenter was trying to make it seem like, well, it's probably this way, but we're also going to try to confuse you that that's the other way.
And that's a great call out because Carpenter, and he did it with the music, but he also did it with certain scenes, the way a scene was ending, even the way the movie ended. He he definitely had a screenwriter, right? And what's interesting is the screenwriter wrote Bad News Bears, and that's what caught John Carpenter's attention, which is so bizarre to me because if you know the movie Bad News Bears, there is literally no parallel between that and a horror science fiction movie like this. But Carpenter saw something in him, right? But as Carpenter is going through the film, and I think this lends what you're talking about, he was making changes on the fly.
Yeah.
And some of it was budget constraints, especially when it came to Botine's effects. But Carpenter would see a nuance here or there. No, I don't think that they would do that, or I think they might do this, or he definitely let that. I wish I knew how to pronounce his name perfectly, but the gentleman that did the score, and he's done so many movies, Carpenter would still get in there and infuse when he felt he needed some more drama from the tone. I don't know. It gives me the chills to think about this movie because we are such film buffs. We love film so much. And it is rare that you come across a movie, and I don't care what year it's from, where it's just brilliant. And it is.
I've been watching this movie since a little kid on VHS.
Nice.
Now owning the 4K Blu-ray, right? And it's just crazy how many times I've seen it, but still it has that draw, and I feel like I've seen it for the first time every time I've watched it. Because I don't music I will listen to on repeat, but movies I don't really repeatedly over and over watch them. But it's usually once or twice a year with one of my favorite movies.
Yeah,
Which is
crack
The
them
Thing.
out, right? Yeah.
So The Thing is definitely a movie that I've seen probably once or twice every year.
Wow. Since you were a teenager?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And it is, and you can't help but be drawn to it, right? We'll come back to this at another time, another date. But when you mentioned that this was maybe your only John Carpenter movie that you endeared yourself to, we'll definitely have to go down that rabbit hole at some point. Um, do you know that the movie, and you mentioned some of these details, so I don't know where you're at with that, but that it was shot in refrigerated sets in Los Angeles
Right.
in
That's
the middle of summer.
right. So it was the middle of summer. So when they go to Norwegian camp, anyways, when they get there in those interior shots, that's all in those refrigeration, so
Yeah.
that they could show their breath being cold.
Yeah, and Carpenter said how they would, and I think you mentioned this to me as well a couple weeks ago when we were prepping for this. He also, the actors are drinking hot liquids and
Yeah.
doing different things to even exaggerate that more. It's brilliant because to me, that's one of the biggest flaws. I don't care what movie it is when they're showing and it's supposed to be so frigid and there's no breath.
Yeah.
I grew up in, when it was 30 below with the wind chill. Trust me, there's breath.
Or there's the other side of that coin now where CGI is getting cheaper and cheaper, but there's some really bad CGI called breath.
I
And I think
bet.
one of the funny thing is there's so much good CGI and so much money in those Harry Potter movies. Pretty sure like one of the like the fourth one in, so like Goblet of Fire or something, there is a couple of scenes of it just looks bad.
Oh,
And you
but
could just tell.
I'm gonna have to take a peek at that. And then in regards to just the locations, there was also shooting in Alaska as well as British Columbia. That's where they got those outdoor scenes, right? As real as can be.
Right. And so one of the scenes I wanted to maybe break down a little bit, and I think it's kind of controversial, that's for sure,
Oh, I like it.
is the dog scene.
Oh
And
yeah.
that dog scene is definitely something that's embedded in my brain and I'll never forget. It's just,
And when you say dog scene, you're talking about towards the beginning of the film,
right, so after the first autopsy, then uh, they're all kind of like trying to keep their mind off of what they just kind of went through,
playing cards.
playing poker. And so the dog that's been running aimlessly throughout the camp, of course, shouldn't have, and bumps into one of the characters underneath the
Under
table.
the
And
table,
he's like,
yeah.
he tells the guy that is taking care,
Clark.
Clark, who's taking care of all the animals, right? Put this goddamn
Yeah,
dog away.
he's pissed because he got shot.
And he thinks about it for like, it seems like a little bit, but he's like, yeah, all right. And then he puts him in there, and I was like, that's what spirals everything, right?
As soon as he closes that weird, it's a wood frame door with the screen,
Yeah,
and he gets that dog in there, and the dog is acting so sheepish
yeah,
when he's amongst his own, right?
yeah. And so from there, it just, I'm sure nothing like that could be done today, and if it was, it would be definitely CGI. But I do feel bad for the dogs in that scene because they're like getting sprayed with whatever the alien jizz, whatever you want to call it.
Some sort of milky substance.
And the dogs actually, they all really do seem frightened. I know that they were really acted well, those dogs, and I don't know how they did that with the dog that was chewing the fence.
Oh my!
How
How
they-
do
how they
they
got
get that
that.
scene? He is chewing his way through that metal, and it looks so real.
And such a smart dog to try to do that, right?
Totally. Well, and what I love, you mentioned that dog, right? So even that scene when the dog does what you were talking about, he walks underneath the table and he startles that one guy that got shot. That was all real. Like they just let that dog go,
Mm-hmm.
and he walked around, and that's what he did. And interestingly enough, his name was Jed, the main dog,
Yeah.
and he was half wolf, half dog. And the Richard Macer, who plays Clark, the dog handler, he worked closely with the real dog handler. Of course, that makes sense. And when we see those weird shots where Jed, that main dog, is just staring,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he seems like a person.
Yeah.
He's looking out the window and he looks like he's really staring. And the real dog handler told the actor that when you see him look like that, leave him alone,
Mm-hmm.
because that was the wolf side and he could have been triggered to lash out. So, I mean, there are so many moving parts. And like you said, I know that things supposedly over the years have improved. But when it comes to filmmaking, when I watch these older movies, I think, man, how hampered would they be in today's age?
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's one of the scenes, and then towards the end of this part, I want to definitely talk about the ending with you.
Cool. Can I run through a few things before we
Yes,
get to
that's what I figured.
So, so just to highlight, we got to give a shout out again to Rob Bottin, just because his name does not look like it's pronounced Bottin, but I saw him say his name, so I definitely know that that's correct. And that 15 million budget that we talked about at that time, about $1.5 million went into practical effects, which was unheard of at the time.
Totally.
Like, almost gave the studio an aneurysm. And Carpenter still was obligated as he was going through the shoot to cut things out, and not because he wanted to, but because he had to because of the dollars. Still unbelievable that much was spent. And Bottin would sleep on the set for 13 months. He stayed in the studio and slept and ate and did everything there. So that commitment to that craft, it shows up, right? It doesn't just,
totally.
it's not just happenstance.
It paid off.
It did. years later, we talked about how it was called instant junk because it grossed just under 20 million. And also, we talk about the all male cast, which I think is brilliant the way that they did it, not to mention the people that they picked for it. I do have to share this. So, we talked about how we have the screenwriter working in unison with Carpenter, but originally, the studio in the mid 70s to late 70s was running through a bunch of directors and writers before they landed on Carpenter. And Toby Hooper, yes, from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he was supposed to be not only the director, but he co wrote a script along with the writer or co-writer from Texas Chainsaw. And there were supposed to be multiple scenes where it was shot underwater. I just thought, how high were they?
Talk about another director that only had one good movie in him.
And people will beg to differ because a lot of people love Poltergeist, but what the hell happened to Toby Hooper? Yeah, and I know that you had said that you want to delve into the ending, and who wouldn't want to? Just to jump ahead a little bit, there were three endings, including one where McCready, Kurt Russell's character, is rescued and he's given a blood test showing he was not one of those things. So the almost a atypical Hollywood happy ending, but Carpenter shot that down. Get this, I never do this until a couple weeks ago. Carpenter tried to make a last minute change to the title.
Yep.
Do you remember what he wanted to call it?
I don't.
So it was the title of the novella. He wanted to call it Who Goes There,
Gotcha.
which I that is a cool title too. But the thing still won out, as we know. The film wasn't testing well. We talked about the fact that E.T. I don't know if that's just E.T. or if it was E.T. the extraterrestrial, but he was, or that movie was ravaging the box office, released 2 weeks prior. And then the film's neutral box office performance, I was really surprised by this, and I saw Carpenter actually say it in an interview, so it's not hearsay. But not only was he removed from making Stephen King's Firestarter with Universal Studios, but Universal Studios bought out the rest of Carpenter's contract because they didn't want him making any more films for him. I thought, wow.
Yeah, it's intense.
And then Carpenter admitted himself that the box office numbers, along with the fan feedback about the thing, resulted in him losing confidence for a long time in his abilities. Just think of how harsh that is. It was released in 1988 on DVD, and we know that it was revisited, obviously, by people who had seen it, but it was that new audience.
So it was released on DVD 1988?
1998.
1998, okay.
Yeah, on DVD. Yep. And then we know it became, you use the term cult classic, and boy, that really fits this. Per John Carpenter, he simply said the making of the film was very unpleasant. And I thought, what an interesting way to put that. And then get this, if you haven't heard this, due to the intense sun and the reflection off the snow, so in Alaska and British Columbia, John Carpenter said he developed skin cancer that he still has to treat to this day from that shoot.
Wow.
That one blew me away, right? You could just see it in his eyes, how he was pained by that.
Talk about bleeding for your craft.
Ouch. That's a perfect way to put it. John Carpenter definitely was disturbed by the fact that the fans hated the film, or at least a lot of them did. And then we fast forward to maybe the last decade, and Carpenter said he's very proud of the film, and ultimately it's one of his favorites that he made and directed. We talked about special effects were all pre-computer and all considered practical effects. When you see this movie, that should blow some people's minds. Do you want to guess what John Carpenter's favorite special effect was in the movie?
Let me go with the head removal.
You nailed it. When the head was landing on the floor and sprouting legs and eyes, almost like a giant spider. And,
Yeah.
and what does the one character say when he looks at it? He turns his head so deliberate. What does he say?
At this very second on the spot, I can't think of it.
You've got to be fucking kidding me.
You're right.
One of my
Yeah.
favorite lines.
Yeah.
We also have pre-production to post-production. You want to guess how long it took? Pre to post. So complete film.
Well, you told me that he was on the set for 13 months.
There you go.
This probably took 2 years.
So it clocked in 13, 14 months, which, as we know, is unheard of in today's filmmaking.
Oh yeah,
It just wouldn't happen, right? We talked about the main dog. I love that part. Shout out to Jed. Rest in peace. And John Carpenter. So I'll wrap up my diatribe. I get to use that word twice in one podcast. John Carpenter talked about how the movie's central core was about the lack of trust in the world, right? And he's talking from a point of view from 1981 and a lack of trust in the world.
yeah,
And then John Kurt Russell's character at one point says, "We don't know who to trust."
yep.
And you talked about that a little bit. Do you want to share anything with the audience about the way the world is today and how fitting that is?
Well, I just with the way this, you know, United States was heading or the world was heading, you could really see that's where it was going. And I mean, if you really look into the movie's details, I mean, you could really tell it. There's layered within there is the world as we know it, that we can't trust anybody, and that's maybe an underlining message you could get from the movie, and where someone like that doctor was so willing to kill them all because he knew what it meant for survival, but some of them were also selfish and wanting to survive
At any cost. Who
at any
cares about
cost.
humanity?
Right.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so that's why, who was really the alien?
Right. Who was the bad guy?
Right.
No, you just again gave me chills when it came to that because that doctor is looking at that. Was that a DOS version of some sort of old computer?
Yeah.
And that simulation shows how many hours it would be before the entire world would be infected. And I'm such a nerd that at one point I calculated those hours, and I believe it came up to 472 days before the world would be fully infected. I've been watching, based on your suggestion, the TV series on Amazon Fallout. And I even see some threads within that and some of the storyline and what Carpenter was relaying along with the screenwriter with the thing. So crazy stuff. I know you wanted to talk about the ending. Do you want to talk about the ending and then we can go into what it means to us and the history that was happening at that time?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, let's do it.
So the ending, after them basically dwindling down to just two
And
characters,
then there were two. Yep.
and they've destroyed everything. They've destroyed everyone, and Kurt Russell, of course, happens to be one of the finalists. And then you could tell he was definitely his friend throughout the movie and someone that he could trust for the most part.
The other guy,
Yes,
Childs.
Charles.
Yeah.
Yep. And they're after everything's just on fire, right?
The whole thing is.
After a huge explosion
Yep.
went off, and they're both laying on their backs. It's definitely nighttime, super cold. It's like disturbing how cold it is.
Yeah,
even
Kurt
though
Russell
there's-
says in a couple hours it'll be too cold for them to survive, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's fire going on around them. But it's again, the camera is so crazy. It's like in your face with them, but it still shows both of them.
You love those close shots.
It's incredible. Well, because you can, if they're really good actors, right? If they're good actors,
Which they both are.
they thrive in that.
Yeah.
And so, and that's even though the movie was, science fiction and said some crazy parts, you're still down to earth people struggling with trying to survive, right?
Absolutely. Character, dialogue, and the story. No, it's beautiful.
When they're on their backs and they're sharing alcohol, right? And you can kind of see Kurt Russell kind of like almost not want to share with him at first because he's like, wait, maybe he is. But then he's like, when, like you said, talks about how they won't survive because how cold it is. He's like, oh, fuck it. We'll just share
Yep.
it back and forth. And it's basically, you have a good feeling one or both of them for sure is one of the things. But at the same time, like, you want to be really hopeful that they made all the right choices and that they're both okay.
Yeah, they're both okay, and that the thing has been quashed
Right.
as much as it can be.
Because when eventually, whenever that is, months from now, that they find that area, the thing could be frozen and then, brought back for further investigation. And then here we go again.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
that's
and
where the sequel comes into play, right?
yeah, it was that begging for a sequel.
Hmm.
There's no two ways about it. And even like you said, we don't know how long it was going to be before they were going to be found, because you've got earlier in the film Windows, the character with the glasses, that's the communication guy. He keeps getting yelled at for not reaching anybody. He's like telling them how bad the storm is. We're not going to reach anybody for months.
And his biggest thing that stuck with me when he says, he says, "We're 1,000 miles from nowhere."
Nowhere. Yes.
What do you mean by that?
It's beautiful. There was even a tidbit there where his character's name was not Windows.
Right.
And he picked up the glasses on the set, or if maybe one of the costume people gave him the glasses, and then they picked up organically that, hey, let's call my character Windows. Like stuff like that. That's the beauty of filmmaking.
Yeah.
I love the ending. And I did. I think it's best that it ended that way rather than that happy version that was
Well,
referenced.
how many movies can you even say today where you still ponder whether that's how it
Right.
should have ended
Yeah.
or there's a different outcome?
Yeah. Hollywood doesn't want to have that.
No.
Then they'll say that a movie like that can't make money if it doesn't have an outcome that the audience can understand, and it's something tangible, and it's too bad.
It really is.
I love that recap of the ending. Love the ending. I'm going to jump in real quick with what does the thing mean to me. So the thing, it's near and dear to me for many reasons. I was really finding my space with movies and the horror genre at the time. I saw it at a theater and was blown away by it. I was not one of those critics. It's one of those films that moves me to make films and be involved with it. John Carpenter became a staple for me, contrary to what Mr. Z is saying about himself. And the horror genre through multiple films that John made. The combination of the sets, the settings, practical effects, acting, story, and musical score, they all moved me almost to tears in a positive way. I remember seeing Kurt Russell when I was a kid in these terrible, to me, Disney movies. That's how he got his start. He was a Disney player, signed a contract with them. And to see him as an adult and knock that out of the park like he did was just amazing. Do you want to speak to what it meant to you?
I think it's one of the first, as a child, like horror movie that I could say that really was ingrained in me. That I would say what made me, you know, not all horror movies have to do with like, a serial killer or some kind of huge villain that has to be made, like, Freddy, for instance, not a creature like that, but kind of like a fear among ourselves, like the paranoia, like that. It just,
The unknown.
it's I think a very smart movie, even if at first it wasn't trying to be, and it just I think that's the whole reason why I'm into movies like I am today is movies like that, and that's what's crazy is that that movie's paved way for so many other great phenomenal movies like that,
Totally.
and I really appreciate the film, and I'm very thankful that the stars had aligned for that, and that researching this, I did not learn that John Carpenter had gotten skin cancer. That really crazy that he was willing to put himself out there just for that. I mean, obviously, he didn't go out of his way to get that, but that's how much he loved making a movie that, you know, and he, like he said, it was treacherous or
Yeah, he threw all caution to the wind,
it was
right?
very difficult to make the movie,
Yeah.
but he still did it.
Unpleasant is
Yeah.
the word he used. Yeah. No, that's a great call. And that part really was hit home. I love that. Anything else you want to say about how it moved you?
No, I think we're good.
Then just real quick litany of what was happening in history in 1982 when that movie came out. Ronald Reagan was our president. George H. Bush was our vice president. Adobe Systems was founded. You and I talked about that. You were well aware of that. We referenced Toby Hooper. Well, Poltergeist was released in 1982, so he was busy with something else.
Yeah.
Tylenol murders took place, which we've spoken to in our newsletter. John DeLorean from the famous DeLorean car from Back to the Future. Well, he was arrested for trying to fund his car company by selling cocaine in 1982.
That almost seems like it's made up, but
If you don't see the video of it from the FBI, you don't believe it. And also 1980s, the recession was coming to an end around October of 82. Michael Jackson's Thriller album is released. Quick trivia. Who plays the lead guitar on Michael Jackson's
Van
Beat
Halen.
It?
Thank you.
Nice. Eddie Van Halen.
Next.
Rest in peace. And Barney Clark in 1982 became the first permanent human heart transplant recipient. So a
Oh,
lot of stuff going on when that movie was released.
yeah, it's a. I can tell you, the '80s were an exciting time going on.
They were. I can attest to that for sure. So there's our wrap on John Carpenter's The Thing. If you haven't seen it, by God, get off your ass and watch it. If you haven't seen it in a while, or maybe you haven't seen it in the beautiful 4K format, we don't promote a lot of that stuff, but get your ass to a store or get it from Amazon and watch it.
100%.
Who goes there? All right, what's up next?
I think Rat. Rat is up next.
Cool. Maybe we're going to be back for more.
That's funny.
All right, we go round and round.
Uh,
Sorry.
Rat, spelled R-A-T-T, by the way, is an American, you could say heavy metal or hair heavy metal band, whatever you want to put in there. They emerged in the 1980s, okay? And what they're really known for, and I definitely think that's what stands out for me, is their catchy hooks. And they're definitely their charismatic lead vocalist. And
Stephen Piercy.
yes. And the band formed actually in 1976 in San Diego, California. Initially under the name of,
Mickey Rat.
yes, before shortening it to just Rat. And so Rat, easily gained mainstream success with their debut.
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 It's French, so the T is
Yes.
silent.
Uh, the album that we're be talking about is Out of the Cellar,
And it's funny, huh? You might get Rats out of the cellar.
which featured single hits Round and Round, like he was joking about, and Wanted Man. So those are, I bet you back in the day, were the hugest songs just constantly being played on the radio.
And that was the album was released in 1984 on Atlantic Records.
Yes.
As Mr. Z said, the group did start in San Diego. A quick tidbit about the fact that they were originally called Mickey Rat. So that was two of the main members of the what we knew to be Rat, which was Stephen Piercy lead vocals and Robin Crosby on guitars. And Mickey Rat was the title of that group was basically thought up because it was anti Mickey Mouse. And they spelled rat with two T's to avoid copyright issues. Just had to throw that out there.
That's awesome. So they are still touring today
Kinda.
and still releasing music.
Kinda.
Today.
It's a mess.
But
It's really Stephen Piercy and then Juan Crusher and Bobby Blotzer. They're all in their own separate entities because of legal battles.
yes, but just they do continue to still do live performances.
Yep. Stephen Piercy just had a grandson, by the way.
Nice, thank you.
You're welcome. Little family tree there from Stephen Piercy.
Yes. So, what do you want to give the album a score of?
Oh, this is a 10. I I don't do tens, whether it's music, movies, or anything else. But I could again talk half a day on this, but it's a 10. It it comes from a place where I was coming into my own, so that has such breath to it by itself. But from just rock and roll of the 80s, I just feel like it's a 10. It's so representative. I know Motley Crue is the one that comes to mind for so many people when they reflect on the 80s. But if you pick up articles about that period, it was Rat and Motley Crue that were considered instrumental in developing the music scene in LA.
For sure. I'm going to give it a 9.
All right, cool.
And just so you know, their next follow-up album, Invasion of Your Privacy, I give that a 10.
Whoa, all right.
So
We're going to have to come back to
not
that
so
at some point, too.
Not a hater.
No,
But
a hater, a 9. Come on. From a guy that's in his late 20s. Are you kidding me?
I'm going to guess your favorite song off the album is In Your Direction.
It is.
Because you happen to send that same song to me a few times lately.
Yep, and I sent it to you before the podcast today. So, yeah,
Yes.
it's one that, at least in Wisconsin, never got any airplay. But I
So,
love that song.
Do you want to guess what mine is off the album?
No, 7th Avenue?
7th
No, I
ever.
think that's off of Invasion. My bad. So you're in trouble.
No,
What's your favorite song?
the scene of the crime.
Oh yeah, you will
And
be caught. Yeah.
why? Because most bands I do not like, especially these days, that really, really repeat their lyrics. I mean, it just
Yeah.
long in the teeth. Even if I like the band,
No,
I
you hate
really.
repetitive. I get it.
But again, I think that's what they were known for is like they're harmonizing, and then of course the lead singer harmonizing at the same time, with them singing the backups. That is, I mean, it was so great, and just something about seeing the crime with the lyrics, and I can really say that I really feel like he was probably speaking from personal experience for sure.
They all were. They all were. And you mentioned it too. I think you used the word or term hook, but they took like you will be caught at the scene of the crime. Like that was a common phrase used in normal day speak depending on what environment you were in, but yet they were able to infuse it into a metal song of the 80s.
And I feel like tons of guys and that girls too, but probably of
Men more. I get it.
yes,
Yeah.
but probably being in that same exact scenario.
Well, and he's talking or singing about infidelity.
Yeah.
You're going to be caught at the scene of the crime.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of us guys, I could raise my hand, at some point have been caught at the scene of the crime.
And he's upset, but
Oh, pissed, yeah.
at the same time he's just like, this is all I'm gonna give about it, and then it's over.
You could totally hear without it being exaggerated, especially in those first two big albums. When he would sing, you could hear he was pissed,
Yeah.
and I love that part. What else you got on this one?
So I think all the songs off this album, I think that like the rest of their albums, I think the songs really go well together. So they did a really good job of having one song after another, even though if they don't bleed into each other, but they fit the theme
Oh.
and what they're going for. And so, and you could say that their lyrics aren't that deep, but I think that they're straight to the point and I feel like anyone, again, talking from a guy's perspective, my perspective,
Especially young guys.
just like that's, I've been there. And
Yep.
like,
Been there, done that.
and you're just like, that is such good music just to drive around in and that, because it's relatable.
Man, do you just knock that out of the park? Like that is, and it's even in my notes, but the fact that the songs go together, you talk about music and you think about, at least I do coming from the genre I did, you've got like Pink Floyd and you've got The Who, and they've got these elaborate albums where clearly they're intertwined. I mean, The Who, one of their albums, I think at least one of them was made into a play.
Mm-hmm.
But Rat did it so seamlessly where every song fits together and you sit down and you can enjoy an entire album. You don't even think about skipping.
Yes.
I love that. And I do. I think that's brilliant feedback. I know that we're getting long in the tooth when it comes to this, and I've got some other things I want to cover about Rats Out of the Cellar. Can I run through a few things, please?
I guess so.
I appreciate that. So you talked about it, but Out of the Cellar was an instant hit. It didn't get a lot of airplay in Wisconsin, but the rest of the country, at least on the West Coast, it was an instant hit. Heavy rotation, FM rock. Heavy rotation on MTV when they still played videos.
Well, Round and Round was one of the most airplayed, by the way,
I believe it. Of all time?
on MTV. Not of all time, but at the time.
At the time. I wouldn't be surprised. And it is triple platinum, which means that it sold 3 million albums. And that was at a time when that's where groups made their money. Yes, they got money from concerts and that, but merchandising in that wasn't in the forefront like it is today. That's where they made their money. They all got rich off of just that first album. We'd be remiss if we didn't list the group. So Stephen Pearcy on vocals, Robin Crosby guitars, Juan Crusher was bass guitar, Warren DeMartini guitars. I'd call him the lead guitarist. And then we had Bobby Blotzer. Is that a better name for a drummer? So shout out to all those guys. Rest in peace, Robin Crosby. The actor on the album cover of Out of the Cellar, Tawny Katane. She was Robin Crosby's longtime girlfriend, by the way. And random, she was in the one R-rated comedy Tom Hanks appeared in, Bachelor Party, and she was also dating Seinfeld and in an episode of Seinfeld. So she's got a long list there, and unfortunately, she died very young. So rest in peace to her as well. You talked about what type of music that this was, what Rat called themselves, especially Piercy. I've seen him say it. They called themselves fashion rock, and it
Like
actually,
Lamb.
well, they called themselves fashion rock. They didn't
Yeah.
want to be glam because Poison had taken that as really their nomenclature. But Piercy loved the fact that they would get dressed up in it, and even pissed off their manager sometimes because they were so worried about what they were going to wear on stage.
Yeah.
With no manager, they were getting screwed out of their earnings around this time, right before this album was fully in the can.
Yeah.
And in steps Marshall Burrell, who became their manager. Get this, he worked with the Beach Boys and brought Van Halen to Warner Brothers. So everything just becomes this full circle when we come up with these ideas. You have these great ideas, and you don't even realize the threads that are there. And we even talk about threads in one of our treatment outlines. Burrell was the nephew of famous comic and actor Milton Berle, who appeared in a couple of Rat videos, one of those that you talked about in their rotation. He was dressed as a woman, which was his signature from early TV in the 1950s. 1984 was the year of the rat on the Chinese calendar. Warren DeMartini, I know you and I talked about this, told VH1 when he heard Nirvana in Temple of the Dog, it was time to change the channel. And that was in 1981. He was saying that. Another one of those reasons why the group broke up. Technically, they broke up in 1992. Constant infighting, heavy drug use was behind that. The surviving members of the band, we talk about that. They're touring in one shape or form, but there's a lot of legal issues. Robin Crosby passed away in 2001 from an overdose, and it's really, we hear that so much about that type of entertainment business. And what does Rat mean to me? I'm definitely going to run through this real quick, but Rat is one of those defining rock groups for me, kind of like that movie The Thing. I was starting to blossom as an adult. Yes, blossom. I had just ended a long-term relationship and started another. That new relationship would culminate with having a beautiful son. I loved the so-called metal side of the 80s, Motley Crue, Skid Row, etc. They were getting tons of radio airplay along with Poison and other glam groups. Rat was not played much in the Milwaukee radio, and I just gravitated towards them, I suppose, because they weren't in our face. You talked about their lyrics being straightforward, no real deep meanings, and their musicianship rocked. And I had the poster from Rat's Invasion of Your Privacy album hanging right by my entryway to the house I was renting post breakup from the long term relationship. And one more thing. When my son's mother and I moved west to the desert from Wisconsin, when we were returning the U-Haul moving truck to the shop, as we pulled into the parking lot, someone was working on a car with the passenger side door open. I could not believe my ears. Rat's Back for More was playing, and I knew I was home. So I really shout out to Mr. Z for selecting, coming up with these ideas. First of all, our format being trimmed down to cover a film and an album from that era. And then these two were just home runs. I can't even express to the audience how powerful these two entertainment elements are. Mr. Z, what would you be a takeaway from yourself today from this beautiful podcast?
That you need to spread how much you're listening to and what you're watching. Spread out the horizons because there's so much I would not have listened to or seen if I was just in one genre, one way of looking at stuff because there is so many ways to look at stuff and even if you're not a horror fanatic or you like that kind of stuff, there's still, even like this movie, it's not just strictly horror. Again, talking about psychology or
Yeah, it's almost an acting
survival.
piece. Yeah,
It just,
beautiful.
and same with the music, it's just being able to relate to things. Yes, not everyone's going to relate to that stuff, but it's still great guitarist, great vocals. It's just stuff like that. Just it's great to have this stuff, and I'm thankful for that.
That's awesome. And I'm gonna say I'm thankful too. I'm just gonna say my takeaway is the fact that film and music moves us like it does. I think it's a very special thing. I know a lot of people that Life is a grind. We know that it can be a grind, it is a grind, but when you can find things that move you and stay engaged like that, it definitely makes that grind more palatable. So thanks for all your shares today, Mr. Z. Really appreciate that. And thanks to our psychos for listening to episode 9 of Psycho Studios podcast. In regards to comments, feedback, and suggestions, we welcome them. Email us at psychostudio66@gmail.com. Again, that's psychostudio66@gmail.com. And reach us at our website, psychostudio.com. And there is a hyphen there. That's psycho-studio.com. Reminder, our podcast newsletter and more can be accessed through our website. Mr. Z has been doing some amazing work on that. Give it a look. And we make announcements on Instagram, X, and Facebook when we drop new content. Be safe and stay psycho.